Ladies and gentlemen, I've already reviewed 2 fusion rifles in the month of October, so I figured let's make it 3. Today we'll be taking a look at Jotunn, a weapon that I've always referred to as the Rage Quit Cannon, due to the reaction that it provokes in PvP. But it's also a fusion rifle that packs a healthy punch on the PvE side of Destiny 2, and it's one that does interact in a fairly unique way with the Particle Deconstruction seasonal artifact mod here in Season 15. So I'll be breaking down Jotunn's stats, perks, functionality, damage output, and performance on both sides of the game. And if you do end up enjoying this video, like, subscribe, share it with your friends. They all go a long way in supporting the content. But as always, only do so if you feel that the content is worth supporting. But we got a lot to cover pertaining to Jotunn, so let's dive in with a quick look at its stats and perks. Jotunn is a solar exotic fusion rifle with a charge time of 780 and, even though it's not displaying correctly, 5 rounds in the magazine. For the stats, we'll pull in some solid numbers from Destiny Tracker. But due to the manner in which this weapon fires, I really only think we need to pay attention to a couple of them. Jotunn has a maxed out impact stat of 100, and this thing does hit hard. But we are looking at pretty low marks in handling and reload speed, sitting at 42 and 31 respectively. Feel free to read as deeply as you want into the rest of them, but the intrinsic trait Charge Shot does a lot of the work here. Hold down the trigger to charge up a single tracking projectile that explodes and burns on impact. And there is a little bit of a misconception regarding the burn damage, which I'll do my best to explain when we get into the PvE testing. There is no true exotic perk on this weapon, but it does come with shield disorient. So on energy matched shield explosions, this will disorient enemies within 7 meters for 5 seconds. And no catalyst for Jotunn either at the time of recording this video. But if you've yet to acquire this exotic and it does pique your interest, it is available for direct purchase at the exotic weapon kiosk at the tower, provided you have the appropriate currencies and access to the Forsaken content, which, by the way, is going to be free to everyone starting in December. Into the PvE section though, so we can start putting Jotunn to the test. Alright, like with nearly all fusion rifles, we hold down the trigger to charge up Jotunn, and when it fires, a single solar projectile will eject from the weapon that will track towards targets. And since this is a travel time projectile, it is not going to be affected in any way by damage fall off. When striking a target, we're going to see impact, blast, and an AoE burn effect, but this burn damage is not applied directly to the target. Rather, it occurs in a solar damage puddle that is created at the point of impact that will only burn for about 1.5 seconds. Watch here versus Carl. Jotunn does carry a bit of a knockback effect on impact. When I hit Carl, he staggers back just a little bit, only taking a single tick of burn damage. But when he's pinned against this pillar with nowhere to go, 8 ticks of damage. So it is area of effect, and make note of this because it is going to come into play when we start looking at the damage numbers. For the reload speeds, at base we're looking at 3.43 seconds to reload, charge, and fire the weapon. If we're equipping a single fusion rifle loader mod, which is quite affordable in the seasonal artifact right now at 1 energy point, we can cut this down to 2.85 seconds. For the ammo reserves, we can carry 17 total rounds at base, and with the single fusion rifle reserves mod applied, we can stack up to 20. So, a pretty decent value for the cost of the mod. On to the damage numbers now, but first, my general disclaimer.
PvE damage numbers are variable and will change depending on content scaling or enemy tier, so I do all of my testing in the Conflux Lost sector on Nessus to keep these damage values consistent and comparable from video to video.
At base, Jotunn will hit Carl for 23,562 points of impact damage and 7,184 points of blast damage. And we can register a maximum of 8 ticks of burn damage at 1,223 apiece. Grand total, 40,530 points of potential damage in a single shot. But do keep in mind, out in the wild, due to the AoE nature of the burn damage, results will vary. But in Jotunn's 5-round magazine, the maximum damage that we can output is 202,650. I was able to fire off these 5 shots in 5.23 seconds, putting the damage per second within a single magazine at 38,747. For a point of comparison, I'll use Telesto. I just reviewed this weapon, so that makes life a little easier on me here. Plus, both our exotic fusion rifles carry some blast damage, and for the most part, are unaffected by damage falloff. Telesto hits Carl for a total of 37,653 points of damage in a single burst. It's going to deliver 263,571 points of damage in its slightly larger 7-round magazine, and Telesto's time to empty I have coming in at 8.76 seconds, so single mag damage per second comes in at 30,088. So, I mean, if we're using Telesto as the measuring stick, Jotunn's really not looking too bad here. But we are living in Season of the Fusion Rifle currently, and Particle Deconstruction does exist. So let's run it back. Jotunn and the seasonal mod do have an interesting interaction. One would expect this to perform more like a linear fusion rifle, gradually ramping up to that maximum 40% target debuff over the course of several shots. But ticks from that solar puddle will count as one hit towards the debuff. You can see this when those yellow damage values start rolling off of Carl, showing us that the debuff is being applied. And each one is scoring a little bit more than the previous. So Jotunn actually can apply the maximum debuff with a single projectile. So as far as damage output, the initial projectile's blast and impact will come in at the base. The burn ticks are going to go 1,401, 1,499, 1,603, and when the full debuff is applied, 1,716. Total damage from the initial burst, 43,829. The next 4 could hit for a maximum of 56,850 apiece, provided every tick of burn damage registers, moving the damage in a single magazine up to 271,229, with the damage per second coming in around 51,860. With Telesto, as I demonstrated in my previous video, it fully primes the target with the impact damage from the initial burst, letting the blast damage from the opening burst make full use of Particle Deconstruction. This allows Telesto to carry 369,306 points of damage in its 7-round magazine, with each burst hitting for almost 53,000 points of damage, putting the damage per second within a single magazine right around 42,158. Moral of the story, both are really good fusion rifles, and both can become a lot better with Particle Deconstruction. When looking at Jotunn's performance, this weapon is a heavy hitter in the energy slot in terms of single shot damage. The burst damage is there in a big way, and really, it always has been. Its total damage per second over the course of all ammo reserves might not live up to the role of Cartesian coordinate in terms of boss damage, but Jotunn's going to drop a lot of major targets with a single round, and it does deal with champions quite easily, making your life a lot easier as you work your way through a given activity. And maybe the biggest selling point for Jotunn is the fact it can be used at basically unlimited range. The projectiles aren't affected by bullet drop, they never self-detonate, they will always hit for full damage, they track towards targets, and you never need to worry about hitting a crit spot. There is travel time on the projectiles, but this definitely can be used as long-range firepower. Also, with the blast and burn damage, it can secure collateral kills. The overall radius isn't terribly impressive, but if enemies are tightly grouped up, you can drop multiple targets. Jotunn's also a solid gambit weapon, great for knocking out big targets from a distance during the moat collection phase. It serves as a more than formidable invasion tool, and puts good damage on the boss when needed. For some cons though, the handling is pretty slow, making swapping between weapons feel a bit clunky. And the below average reload speed is going to cut into the DPS of this weapon over the course of several magazines. Also, no catalyst, so no orb generation. Then the tracking, while it definitely has its benefits, can pull your shot off of your intended target. It's going to bend toward whatever enemy enters its vicinity first, which may not be the desired result. And lastly, if you want to hit the upper echelons of the damage output with Particle Deconstruction, you have to have an enemy settle into that puddle. This isn't a huge issue when firing on a target that's basically immobile, but most enemies in the game do move, so it may take a few shots to ramp up to the maximum target debuff. So while the damage numbers that we ran do look quite impressive, you gotta take them with a grain of salt, because they are by no means 100% guaranteed. But onto the PvP section, so we can take a look at Jotunn in the Crucible. Alright, in PvP, the damage numbers with Jotunn are a shade inconsistent. We're seeing 241 points of impact damage, which just that right there is enough to down a Guardian at any resilience tier, 82 points of damage from the blast, and burn ticks will score 8 points of damage apiece. But I didn't always see that blast value pop, which isn't terribly uncommon when one facet of a weapon's damage does overkill the target. Even in a situation where enemies were standing shoulder to shoulder though, sometimes the secondary target took the 82 points of blast damage, and sometimes they only ate the burn ticks. And I'm not exactly sure why this is the case, but maybe the blast radius is just that tight. It's something to be aware of. Either way though, don't expect to down multiple full health targets with Jotunn in a single round. Versus a Guardian in a roaming super, expect to need to commit 2 shots. The damage it applies with a single round is solid, but it won't quite finish them off. And just like we talked about in the PvE section, no damage fall off in the Crucible either, so feel free to let them fly from range. So, Jotunn's got a lot going for it, but this gun isn't a world beater. It can be very strong, but I've never considered it brokenly overpowered. I've made that statement anytime I've talked about this weapon, and feel free to disagree with me, but I stand by that opinion. Jotunn definitely has its benefits though. The overall nature of the weapon makes it very easy to wield. Even though the charge time does need to be accounted for, it can be effective while in the air. The tracking allows for the shots to be a bit off target when they release and still have a chance to land. The projectiles can one-shot unsuspecting enemy targets at unlimited ranges. A 5-round magazine feels very healthy on a weapon that is basically a rocket launcher grenade launcher hybrid. While it does take 2 charges, Jotunn can be a quite effective anti-super weapon. Just the presence of a Jotunn being on the field can disrupt the enemy's gameplay because it is powerful enough that it does need to be respected. It can provoke a rage quit on the enemy team, giving your team the numbers advantage moving forward. And what I think it does best of all is punishing less mobile players who don't have a good handle on how to use cover properly. If someone's constantly wandering around out in the open, a Jotunn user will eat them up. On the flip side of that coin, we run into what I consider to be Jotunn's biggest weakness. A highly mobile and highly aggressive player, especially one that knows what they're doing in the Crucible, can give a Jotunn user fits. At range, movement is the key to breaking tracking on the projectiles. If an enemy player is looking to close the gap on you, a smart Guardian will work to bait out a shot. If they're able to move up a little bit more and get in tight, that puts the Jotunn wielder in a tough spot. When using Jotunn at close range, you need to be much more accurate. Jotunn does have a fairly long charge time, and unlike standard fusion rifles, we shoot a single travel time projectile, not a hit scan multi-projectile burst. And these projectiles do need some air time for that tracking to actually kick in. They're not going to hang a hard right straight out of the barrel to try to catch an enemy target. Plus, the slow handling really hinders your ability to pull your offhand weapon in a timely manner. So when looking at the big picture, is this a strong weapon? Absolutely. But its faults are significant enough that it can be outplayed once its presence is realized. Is Jotunn annoying to fight against? Sure. Egregiously overpowered? I don't feel like it is. But either way, the almighty toaster certainly remains a solid pick for PvP. For the verdict, Jotunn is a weapon that performs quite well on both sides of the game. There was basically nothing that I asked of it in PvE this go round that it couldn't handle, especially with Particle Deconstruction in the mix. And while a lot of people get hung up on DPS values, do not discredit burst damage. It can be equally, if not more important, in a given situation. And burst damage is what Jotunn delivers. In PvP, whether you agree with it or not, I've said my piece. But I will make a recommendation and say that this is a great pick for mid to low skill players. It's very easy to use and highly lethal. And while you may outgrow it at some point due to its lower skill ceiling, Jotunn definitely can be an extremely effective weapon. But hey, since you made it to this point in the video, if you did enjoy it, please remember to leave it a like, and consider subscribing to the Ironworker Gaming channel if you're not already, to catch more Destiny 2 content presented by yours truly. If you'd like to contact me, I do have a very neglected Twitter account, Ironworker814 over there. Join our channel Discord, link is in the description, or comment down below and I will do my best to get back to you. And with all that being said, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your day to check out this weapon breakdown. You guys are awesome, and I will catch you on the next one.